Welcome to Learning with UNP. In the session of Data Science and Mastering Machine Learning, we are going to understand about K-means clustering. That includes understanding about what is clustering, what is K-means clustering, working of K-means clustering, example of K-means clustering, how to choose the value of K, evaluation metric, and finally understanding about pros and cons of K-means clustering. Let's begin with understanding about what is clustering. Clustering can be defined as the task of grouping data points based on their similarity with each other. Clustering is also called as cluster analysis. Clustering can also be defined as a method used to group similar data points together. Each group called a cluster contains data points that are more alike to each other than to those in other clusters. This technique is called unsupervised learning because it does not need any pre-labeled data to know how to group the items. It simply looks for patterns and similarities among the data points to form the clusters. Now, let's understand what is K-means clustering. K-means clustering is an unsupervised learning algorithm, meaning it does not need labeled data to work with. It identifies patterns in the data without knowing what those patterns are in advance. The K in K-means represents the number of clusters you want to create, which you decide based on how you wish to organize your data. Each data point is assigned to one and only one cluster, ensuring that clusters do not overlap. This way, K-means clustering effectively partitions the dataset into different groups based on their similarities. Over here, let me tell you the objective of K-means clustering. The main goal of K-means clustering is to group data points into clusters. In each cluster, the data points are very similar to each other. At the same time, the data points in different clusters are very different from each other. This way, K-means clustering helps to organize your data into clear and distinct groups based on their similarities. Let's now look at what is centroid. A centroid in K-means clustering is the geometrical central point of a group of data points. It is found by calculating the average position of all the points in that group. Centroids help to define each group and are used to decide which group a new data point belongs to by finding the closest centroid. Let's now understand the working of K-means clustering. Step 1. Choose the number of clusters K. Means decide on the number K to determine how many clusters you want to create. Step 2. Initialize cluster centers, centroids. Means randomly select K points from the dataset as initial centroids. These points represent the centers of the clusters. Step 3. Assign points to nearest centroid. Means assign each data point to the centroid that is closest to it, forming K initial clusters. Step 4. Update centroids. Means calculate the new centroid which is center of each cluster by taking the mean of all data points assigned to that cluster. Step 5. Reassign points and update centroids. Means repeat the assignment of data points to the nearest centroid and recalculation of centroids until no more reassignments occur or a stopping criteria is met. Step 6. Verify consistency. Means verify if there are no more changes in centroid positions or data points or assignments. If changes are still happening, return to step 4. Otherwise, proceed to finish the clustering process. Step 7. Finish. Means the K-means clustering model is now ready with each data point belonging to one of the K clusters based on similarity to cluster centroids. Now let's understand K-means clustering better using an example. Before applying K-means clustering, we have a bunch of data points that are ungrouped and don't have any labels or categories. After applying K-means clustering, these data points are stored into clear and distinct clusters. For example, the data points are now grouped into green, blue, and red dots based on how similar or different they are from each other. This way, K-means clustering helps organize the initially ungrouped data into meaningful groups. Now, let me tell you in detail about how to select the K value in K-means clustering. Here are three methods to help select the optimal K value for K-means clustering. First method is to try different K values. Begin by experimenting with various number of clusters, K values, and observe how data points are grouped differently under each scenario for each k. Second method is to compare results. Evaluate the quality of clustering results for each k value. Evaluate how well the data points within each cluster are grouped together and how distinct the clusters appear compared to others. Third method is to use elbow method. This method helps you find the best number of clusters. Plot a graph with the number of clusters on the x-axis and the sum of square distances, means how far the data points are from the cluster centers. On the y-axis, look for an elbow in the graph, a point where adding more clusters does not significantly improve the result. This elbow point suggests the optimal number of clusters to use. The elbow method graph helps determine the optimal number of clusters in K-means clustering. Over here, let me explain you about elbow method clearly. X-axis, it represents the number of clusters K. Y-axis shows within cluster sum of squares WSS, which measures the total distance between each data point and the center of its assigned cluster. Lower WSS means more compact clusters. As you increase the number of clusters, WSS decreases because the clusters become tighter. The curve on the graph shows this decreasing WSS. The elbow point on the curve is where the reduction in WSS slows down, indicating the ideal number of clusters. This is the point where adding more clusters does not significantly improve the compactness of the clusters. By following these methods, you can systematically determine the most appropriate K value that best partitions the data into meaningful clusters. Now, let's move on to understanding the evaluation metric of K-means clustering. In K-means clustering, we use SSE, sum of squared errors, to assess how well the cluster fits the data. Here is how it works. We start by placing centroids, which are cluster centers, randomly among the data points. The algorithm repeats until the centroids stop moving significantly. This ensures that the clusters become stable. And then SSE measures how close each data point is to the centroid of its assigned cluster. It is calculated by adding up the squared distances of each point from its closest centroid. The goal of k-means is to minimize the total distance. By adjusting cluster assignments iteratively, the algorithm aims to make the clusters more compact and the points within each cluster are more similar to each other. This approach helps k-means clustering organize data into clusters that are tightly grouped and distinct from each other based on their similarities. Finally, let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of k-means clustering. Advantages of k-means clustering are: k-means clustering is easy to understand and straightforward to apply even with large datasets. It computes quickly, making it suitable for datasets with many data points. It works well with separated clusters. It works well with the datasets that have many dimensions or features. K-means clustering always reaches a stable solution, ensuring reliability. Whereas the disadvantages of K-means clustering are: you need to know or guess the number of clusters beforehand. Depending on where you start, results may vary. It might not find the best clusters if starting points are not well chosen. It works best when clusters are round shaped and of similar sizes. It may struggle with irregularly shaped clusters. It does not handle data that does not fit into spherical clusters well, like complex or nonlinear relationships. And K-means clustering may end up with a less ideal solution. This is all about today's lecture. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.